All right. I think a stage and everything. I never get one of these. While you guys are getting settled, I'll do my opening spiel. I always like to kind of get things started. So first of all, let me thank Karina and Tina and all the folks at Microsoft for letting me moderate a panel. When they asked me, I said, well, what is a meetup? Because, you know, I spend my day in hotels and conference rooms and covering panels, and I cover talks and speeches. And they said, well, meetup is like, you know, we're meeting up. I was like, okay. I said, count me in. And then they said, we're going to have a panel full of feds. And I said, oh, it's even better, right? I can make some connections. And none of you are feds. But that's okay, because we're still going to have a pretty good conversation. So, as you heard, I'm Jason Miller. I am executive editor of Federal News Radio. That's on 1500 AM here in the DC area. Do we have DC people? Are we in the federal community, or are we outside the federal community? Nobody really understands what I'm talking about. All right. So if we go through an acronym, if Raphael and I start getting into acronyms like CPIC and FedRAMP, and you don't understand a word we're saying, please raise your hand and ask, what the hell are you saying? Because I'm telling you, we could go all day on the acronyms, right? So, Federal News Radio, that's my one shameless plug. I'll just give you the quick 3 Ps of Washington. We don't cover politics, we cover programs, policy, and people. So we cover kind of how the sausage is made of government. So as a journalist who covers that and on the AM radio dial, I'm bringing you some AM radio trivia to get your evening going. And this way you can also impress your family and friends later tonight. And they said, Dad, Mom, what did you do tonight? You said, well, I can tell you about AM radio. So here we go. This is the first question. When was the first regular AM radio broadcast? When did it start? Give me a year. Guess, come on. This is interactive. Close. 1909. Someone looked it up on their Google. I'm very disappointed. All right, here we go. That's a good one. First time anyone got it. A San Francisco area radio station called KQW actually began broadcasting. Later, KCBS in 1949 began weekly radio shows. But in 1909, when they began broadcasting, they were asking people to listen and report back what they heard. So it was not even a radio broadcast. It was just a, hey, are you hearing anything? All right, here we go. Number 2. Now, this is an easier one. For the most part, stations we know that east of the Mississippi begin with a W, WFED, WTOP if you're in the area. Stations west of the Mississippi use the letter K. So how many stations that are on the left of the Mississippi still use the letter K in their call signs? Any guesses? 4, no, more.
You said on the left of the Mississippi? Is this a trick question? Left and west are the same?
In the east coast.
Okay.
Yeah, you threw me off. As you're facing up. The K on the W side. Here we go. Okay, so there's 6 radio stations that are east of the Mississippi that use the letter sign K as their first call signs. 11 of them, 11 radio stations west of the Mississippi use their call sign W. And 2 other little tidbits of fact. Canadian radio stations are C, we know that, and Mexican radio stations are X. So, a little bit of trivia that you may not have known. Okay, so now you can impress your family and friends, as I said, with AM radio trivia. The whole point of this is to remind you all that, yes, your AM radio button still works. Please use it. We need some listeners. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I've asked our panelists to give you about 2 to 3, 4 minutes to kind of tell you something you don't know, government, IT, modernization, cybersecurity. They're not going to tell you where they're from. They're not going to tell you about their bio. Hopefully, Raphael won't tell us about his what Northrop Grumman does and how great they are, well, because no one wants to hear it. And then we're going to get into your questions. So I love the wireless mic. If you remember, if any of you are old enough like me and you're big Phil Donahue fans who likes to walk the aisles. So please participate, ask questions, let's have a conversation. So let's kick it off and then we'll go from there. So Raphael, I'll keep picking on you, so you take us away. What are you going to tell us about cyber IT modernization? Are we on? Who's talking?
You want to turn the light off, so the light's off. There you go.
Now it's on. Is it on now? Yeah. How many technologists does it take to turn on a mic? So after Mark's conversation, I thought, well, what is there to talk about? If you need to go to the cloud and you need cybersecurity, you go to Azure. What else is there to say? Okay, somebody got that joke. So I am actually very glad to be here and glad to be representing Northrop. Great organization, great people, great engineers, and glad to be a part of them. Actually, I'm working now in the state and local government on doing health IT, health social services. So I've kind of gone full circle because I started in state government with the Department of Human Services as a CIO in Illinois. And then I was a CIO for the state, and when we had an abrupt change in administration, the new governor came in. Nobody got that, okay. Illinois politics, okay. When we had a new administration come in, the new governor brought in his CIO, and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said I wanted to do security, I wanted to be the CISO. I said, but I don't want to report to the CIO, I want to report to you. And he said, well, you'll report to the CIO. Because well, that was the normal thing to do. But then when I became the CIO at HUD, I wanted the CISO to report to me because I wanted to operationalize cybersecurity. And so now I'm at Northrop and working with state governments on their cybersecurity capabilities, among other things. But it's I've been doing more cybersecurity now recently because it's such a crucial and critical capability for state governments and for everybody, in fact. And there's still a lot of holes. There's still a lot of opportunities. And I think that there are, I always feel when I'm in front of a group of technologists and IT people, I'm really talking to the wrong folks, because you folks get it. You understand what it's about. And because cybersecurity isn't a capability that you just have and you're glad to have it. It's something that permeates the entire organization. It's a capability, it's a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of breathing. It's a way of executing the mission for the organization. And so if it doesn't become that, it will never change the way the Equifaxes in the world happen, right? It'll never change those things. So, so what is the compelling argument here? What is the compelling statement? Is that cybersecurity is not about IT. And yeah, you guys know that, right? Cybersecurity is about a way of having the organization approach its mission and adopting a risk management capability to address the issues.
All right, so Rafa, when you work with the clients, and I think one of the things that we've seen time and again, whether it's at HUD or now, as you said, state and local, what's the one missing piece then when it comes to cybersecurity? It's not about the technology, we know that. It's about the culture, we know that. But what's the one missing piece? Is it the executives still don't get it? Is it be able to explain the cybersecurity in a way so the executives understand it better? What's missing?
Inertia.
Inertia. You can't accept inertia.
It's inertia. So knowledge is knowing what you have to do. Wisdom is executing what you know to do. And organizations are just not wise and don't execute effectively. One of the first things I did as a CISO in Illinois was a data classification project. And I did it because I was the CIO watching myself not do cybersecurity. For a whole 2 years, I was doing consolidating data, shutting down data centers, moving people, building a new IT organization, implementing ITSM and ITIL, and creating essentially a private cloud for the state. And I was watching myself not do cybersecurity. So when I knew that we had moved all these servers, we had moved all these applications, we had done all these things, and nobody had any idea where the data was, who owned the data, where was the data going, where was the data coming from, and I had no way as the CISO to implement a set of controls in that environment if I didn't know where the data was, where it was coming, who owned it, and where it was coming from, who had access to it. So I had that data classification. It took me literally 4 months to convince, pounding on the table, this has to be done. Nobody understood why. And when I talk, because it wasn't an IT project. Data classification is not an IT project. It's a business project. It's engaging the business owners Am I going too long?
No, you're not. They wanted me to come in the light, but I like to be on the side. I like to walk.
Because I
It's a
can
nervous
go on.
thing.
I don't want to talk too much about it because I know that these
All right,
guys
so
have more things to say.
let's jump
but
over to Matt.
But it's that inertia is
Inertia.
getting people to move forward
All right.
with ideas.
Matt, you're the CISO on the panel. Inertia. Tell us what your take is on this.
Yeah. So inertia. I mean, I would describe it also as culture, right? And I think a lot of what I do as a CISO is human psychological experimentation. Right? We have to deal with users. They are the weakest part of the system. And so a lot of it is about redesigning processes, data classification, things like that, to make sure that the easiest path is also the secure path. So what I'm always looking to do is, I understand I did operational IT for a long time before I got into security. Users will always find a way. And what you want to do is make sure that the way that's not what you want is painful. As an example, in the Azure world, we generally don't want any of our admins ever touching or having any interaction with production. We would do basically everything through a software interpretation layer, so you can't actually, inadvertently reboot the whole East Coast operations because you fat finger a particular set of data. You can't see customer data because you're not ever interacting directly with it, things like that. But there are situations and environments where you might need to. And so as a result, we still allow that to happen because we don't want admins or users or engineers to find a way around our security features. We just make it painful, right? So in order to do that, we have to do it just-in-time two-key solutions. So if you want to touch customer data, a second person has to say yes. And now I'm waiting for that second person to give me approval. And you want to see a dev get itchy and angry? It's when they want to work on something and they're waiting on someone else to give them approval. They get mad, right? And then, or I make them go through an escort. So somebody else is watching over their shoulder when they're touching things. What happens? They go write non-interactive scripts that do this in a way that satisfies my need that they're not inadvertently seeing customer data or breaking things, so that they never have to go through the pain again of waiting or talking to another human being, because that's what they don't like, right? So I'm using the psychology of those people to then influence security behavior. I want to make the smooth path, the secure path, and the less secure path, the painful, rocky one that they will avoid if they, you don't touch things that are hot, right? Well, I make everything insecure hot.
It's fascinating because it's almost the path of least resistance. When they find a ton of resistance, they figure a way to go around it. Like water, if you think about water going down a hill, it hits a rock, it goes around it. It's almost the same thing. Instead of going around the block, it's creating life, making life easier. I mean, that's what you're getting to.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a friend and former colleague of mine, and a good friend to this day, is the laziest person I've ever met. And
he's a journalist, right?
No.
I'm telling you, we're lazy people.
But I would use him as a test. I would give him projects, and I would watch what he was doing and not doing, because I was figuring out he was always finding that path of least resistance, right? And then I used that sort of pathfinder to figure out how do I mainstream that for other people who don't have this. I'll spend a whole bunch of time figuring out how to not do work, right? He's going to invest a ton of time and energy to not have to do things later. Great, I want to execute on that. And to some extent, that is part of the inertia. It's the culture. It's looking at these behaviors that your admins, your users, everybody else is going to do day to day, and thinking about how can I leverage that. Cloud makes it easier. You can use big data analytics. You can start paying attention to heuristics. You can see behavioral patterns and say, oh, I now see how people are actually interacting with this. Here's how I want them to interact with that. How can I shape and design that? Interestingly, I started out life as a political scientist. I wanted to be an urban planner at one point, and now I feel like I'm designing digital cities in the cloud instead of real ones in the real world, but it's still putting stoplights in the right place to make sure the traffic patterns work.
All right, very good. Greg Shipley from In-Q-Tel, talk a little bit about what you're seeing around cybersecurity, IT modernization, the integration.
Okay, all right. Clearly I can't work a microphone. So I think, whenever speakers ask questions about, hey, how many people in the audience, and then you do the raise the hand thing. And so I think Mark's question about whether any of us believed that cloud would always be a hobby thing or not a serious thing. We're not going to put our serious work. Keep going. Yep. That's Should I do it from here? All right. I really can't use a microphone. So what's funny is like I didn't raise my hand, and then for the last like 20 minutes I've been thinking, wait a minute, was I one of those guys? Like was I one of those guys who thought, hey, this thing is never actually going to be production ready for really sensitive stuff? And you know, I kind of entered the federal land in 2010, and before that I was a practitioner, but I was also a tech journalist. I wrote and did product reviews, and I was thinking back to when all this stuff got started in the early 2000s, and one of the things I've been thinking about ever since, frankly, is this notion of transparency, right? So in the early days of cloud, we were asking these questions of, is the cloud secure, right? As if it's a binary thing. When the reality is what we should have been asking was, hey, is it more or less secure than what I'm doing now? And in order to answer that question, you have to, A, know what security controls a cloud provider has, which historically has been really bad, and then lo and behold, you also have to have a pretty good idea of your own controls, which has also been historically pretty bad, right? So when we fast forward and we talk about, you know, we were having a conversation earlier about some of the technologies that are being brought to market, and what's really interesting for me anyway is comparing and contrasting how the big juggernaut cloud providers approach transparency, right? So if you look at you know, what Google's been doing, and specifically, you know, they typically keep things pretty secretive. And I was reading a blog post the other day about their Titan chip. I don't know if anyone's followed this, but they're going after similar trusted compute-like functions. And then Microsoft came out with the announcement about Azure and SGX. And SGX is a pretty well, I don't know if I want to say pretty well understood, but it's coming from Intel. It's pretty well documented. It's fairly transparent. And so I've been thinking a lot more of, like, as we look forward, you know, does transparency wind up becoming one of the key differentiators?
And when you talk transparency, you're saying where things are located, or you're looking, so you have two microphones now. Really?
Yeah,
you give them two?
I'm putting this over here. I'm totally terrified of that.
So how do you define, I guess, transparency? Because a lot of people think transparency...
Sure. Transparency in controls, transparency in how things are done under the hood. You know, I was talking to one of my colleagues who's at one of the big banks, and we were actually talking about the SGX thing specifically, and Google's approach and what Amazon is or is not doing. And he commented to me, he said, like, look, transparency in crypto is table stakes, right? There's certain things that you might be able to, you know, I don't want to say hide behind, but you say, hey, that's our secret sauce. Don't worry about that. We're protecting this. That's closed source, whatever. But he said when it comes to the banking community, and I'd be curious if any of you come out of that community if you think differently, but he said in the banking community, transparency in crypto is critical, right? We can't, because every time we don't have transparency there, like what winds up happening? We find horrible flaws. I mean, even when we do have transparency, you know, this WPA2 thing that just came out, we still sometimes have flaws, but it's far worse when it doesn't.
What Greg is getting to, I think, is one of the critical areas is that we as organizations don't hold those cloud service providers accountable for that transparency and for the controls that they have in place. We don't know what we have, we don't know what they have, and so it's a mess. And so having that understanding, Mark was talking about being able to get the logs and being able to see what's going on. That is critical for organizations to be able to have a good management capability to tie their hybrid cloud. Because if they're in the cloud, they've got their own on-prem solution. So how do they tie both so they can understand what's going on?
All right. I want to let Matt jump in because I know you're biting at the bit here. But real quick, so because I want to bring this back around to IT modernization as well. So put you on the spot, Raphael. So if you have that transparency, if you have that comfortability, does that make IT modernization an easier move in some ways, 30 seconds or less?
No, because the IT modernization is more about what is the business imperative? What are you trying to do? And now you're starting to talk about the process. You're going to change processes. You're going to change roles and responsibilities. You're going to change access, and that goes well beyond. Cybersecurity needs to be a part of that conversation from the very beginning. But it's way past cybersecurity, because if you don't understand the processes that you're trying to, and the mission that you're trying to accomplish, you're not going to be able to implement the appropriate cybersecurity capabilities.
All right, you almost left it 30 seconds. Matt.
Yeah, so I mean, I would just say beyond just crypto, any cybersecurity field, transparency should be table stakes and not vague, like radical transparency. That's the way that we approach it. That's the way I approach it with my whole team. There was some cultural differences when I first started at Microsoft. There are still people in the world who believe that secrecy equals any amount of security, and they are wrong. You have to approach it because the truth is the adversaries are better funded and smarter than we are. They have more people and more resources and more motivation than even an organization like Microsoft does to handle this problem. The only way we balance that scale is to share nakedly and openly all of our flaws and all of our successes with everyone, or we're constantly going to be in a tactical, behind the curve sort of game.
All right, let's go to the audience questions. Remember, I can ask them all day. There we go. Look, I get to come off stage and do everything. The camera guys are really mad at me.
Hi there. This may be more of a technical question than a policy question for you guys or anyone who knows. But what our company does is we do brainwave signal processing. So we have to get the brain waves scanned from an amplifier, goes into a computer, compares it against the database, sends it back to the user as instantaneously as possible so that they can then change their brain waves. And we're looking at moving to cloud so we can do that between multiple people across the country. But our biggest concern has been throughput. When are we going to have the speed to do that? Have you guys experienced, do we already have that speed, or should we wait a few years before we try to do this?
Yeah, day traders have that speed. Talk to the day traders.
But they have a hard line into...
You can get a hard line into our cloud too. We offer that. We have the second largest amount of dark fiber worldwide. You can connect directly into our private network, which was built for speed. Some customers use it for security, but it's called Express Route because it's about going fast. So that's available. The cloud providers, the big cloud providers, we spend a lot of time dealing with latency. We put FPGA capabilities into our networking devices so we can measure latency within a region inside of Azure in low microseconds. Not milliseconds, but microseconds. Like double-digit microseconds.
So it's ready now.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some last mile concerns, right? You have to make sure you can have a high-speed connection to us, depends upon how your stuff. But yeah, you can connect parallel 10 gigabit connections to us inside that region, and we have regions all over the world, so there's something that's going to be closer. Now, if you're in like sub-Saharan Africa, that's going to take longer, right? There is some speed of light sort of stuff, but if you're relatively close to population centers, you can do very quick transactions. We also then have on-prem stuff, so we have high latency solutions through Azure Stack, and when I say high latency, it was designed for submarines that go under the water for 6 months, so that's really high latency. Those sort of solutions exist as well. You can take advantage of the cloud in multiple formats today.
All right, we got another question here. Did you?
Thank you. My name is Li Yang. I think cybersecurity and all this is really advanced, but our government agencies are doing such a slow pace. Everything is sort of lack of accountability and transparency. They really cover up. So I just wonder if we have this high-tech industry as leaders, ask the government to really forward everything rather than cover up, because from the early spam, everything is a sort of suppressed and they don't open up. And if you have any request or our government information, they just simply ignore it. So could you do something about it? So let's enjoy better well-being for whole society.
All right, so I think you're maybe talking to the wrong group, but Raphael, jump in.
So I wanted to talk about how at HUD,
You're on.
at HUD, when I started there, we didn't have any the dual factor authentication, and there was a breach, and the DHS and the CIO said the federal CIO said we're going to have to do it, and we put the plan together, and this is another example of inertia as well. We put the plan together. We said, here's how we'll do it. We went and talked to the administration, and we said, this is how we'll do it. We can do it in a weekend. We can do it over the weekend. And they didn't understand that we could, that we would be able to do that, and they were afraid. They were, we said, because we knew that some folks may not get access because of the way the whole thing was configured. But they wouldn't want to do it. But eventually we did it, and so HUD was dead last from a security perspective. And then when I left, thanks to our CTO, Mark Hayes, our CISO, Carlos Segarra, and my deputy CIO, Kevin Cook, these guys made it happen. We were in the top 10 of, so it happens. They can move forward.
All right, another question from the audience? All right, I'll ask one, because that's my job. So one of the things when we talk about IT modernization, when we talk about cybersecurity, and Raphael, you made the good point to say, they're not, cyber is a major part of IT modernization, but at the same time, to sometimes take something off premise, put it in the cloud, to sometimes make that decision, and is it transparent enough? Let me start with Greg maybe on this one. What are you hearing when you talk to government customers, and are they comfortable with that cloud move that would lead them down the path to better IT, more modern IT?
Yeah, so I think there's a macro problem, and I don't think it's unique to government, but I think it's amplified in government, right? And when you work at Inquitel, you kind of keep one foot on the East Coast and one foot on the West Coast, and I don't need to tell the audience that our nation is more divided than ever in multiple ways. And one of the interesting things is Valley perspective is very different than enterprise perspective, and it's growing, right? The divide, at least in my opinion, is growing. So one of the issues is that in a lot of legacy enterprise, whether it's government or commercial, there's a tremendous amount of tech debt, right? So when you talk to, we still have, people don't talk about this, but there's still huge business functions that run on top of mainframes, right? In fact, most of the people in this room probably have something you've done in your life has touched a mainframe in the last month or two, if not today, right? So there's a macro problem with when do you double down and get rid of tech debt and re-engineer, and that's an issue in itself. It's amplified in government. The other challenge, I'll say two other challenges, then I'll kick it back. But the other challenges is government tends to be a little bit slower at taking risks on new things, right? And so there's a lot of power to incumbent players and not looking at innovative approaches, whether they come from startups or whether they come from large companies. So there's a resistance there. The last thing I'll say is that part of this has nothing to do with tech, and it's purely cultural, which is there's not a lot of downside in specifically government in continuing to do the same thing, right? Like in industry, like if you lag behind at a certain point, your competitors, if they move faster and more efficiently, they will eventually crush you, right? And that's not necessarily the case in a lot of government things. So not making a decision is making a decision, but a lot of people don't realize that, and there's not a lot of downside.
Right. There's a lot of upside to the technical debt, as you said. So Matt, jump in a little bit, and forgive me, are you working with both public sector, private sector? Do you not work with clients? Are you just internal?
So I am the CISO for the Azure government environment, but I work with customers across the board, and I have security responsibilities for our global fleet and things like that. Wow, there's so much rich in that topic and things that I wanted. So my first thing, you sparked some ideas. If any of these government agencies are at all security related, they actually do have competition. And I can tell you from some of our international customers, there are other nation states that are not waiting to take advantage of the capabilities and the power of the cloud. And that makes me, as an American citizen and taxpayer, a little worried, right? There's concern about, is the government actually going to be able to take advantage of the things that other nations are taking advantage of, or are we suddenly winding up in a pretty significant technical debt, especially at the pace of innovation of the cloud? Right, it's coming to a world where 1 year of behind the curve on the cloud is like 5 to 10 years behind normal technology, which is a pretty serious problem. The other thing I would say along those same lines, your question, starting off, is it okay to move data to the cloud? I did 110 meetings with executives, government and non-government last year, or last fiscal year. Out of those, I think 9 had any doubt about security in the cloud. Most people understand, and what I generally start every briefing with is that the cloud is more secure than you are capable of being. I was government auditor for a long time. I've worked with other cloud products. I think our least secure thing of any of the hyperscale providers is more secure by leaps and bounds than anything I ever looked at inside the government space, right? Let alone private industry or anywhere else.
Raphael, jump in here, because you guys, when you're at HUD, you made some big decisions and you took everything to the cloud. Did you have those same discussions as Greg talked about? People are, well, maybe we shouldn't because, or well, if we modernize that, that could cause the downstream problems. I mean, you talk about inertia, and I think that's maybe what you're getting to.
So when I went to HUD, I was given a couple of gifts that allowed me to move things forward quickly. And the first thing we did was go to Office 365. And when we did that, we bought the whole stack, Azure, CRM Dynamics, and Office 365, all wrapped around AD, right? And giving us that single sign-on, that single access and identity management, which to me was critical, to be able to have that one solution that we could build on and integrate and provide an enterprise solution, and not just small pieces, right? I could have gone to Amazon for one thing, could have gone to Google for another, and Salesforce for another. But then, how would I integrate those? How would I really build an enterprise solution with those three disparate solutions, disparate packages? And so that gave us the ability to go quickly and to experiment. And we failed fast. Right? We made mistakes quickly. We learned from them, and we were able to regroup from that and show some quick successes. It wasn't entirely flawless, but it was successful because we were able to continuously learn from what we were doing and take the risk. It was certainly a very risky endeavor, but it paid off in the long run.
All right. I'll just go back to the audience. Another question for the audience at all? All right, go in the back. We'll meet you halfway. Sure, meet me halfway. Tell them who you are.
I'm Jeff Engel. I'm a VP at United Data Technologies, a Florida-based company. So my background, I spent some time doing critical infrastructure vulnerability assessments for the DoD. So that's the extent of my cyber experience. But I'd like to get your guys' impression of the acquisition issue, right? I think that's always the elephant in the room. As we move more rapidly with technology, the acquisition processes don't. And obviously with Microsoft Azure, the ability to predict pricing is an issue. But then with the IT modernization and the integration of cybersecurity, how you view the technical evaluation of government solutions when they may not even have the technical expertise within that existing agency to determine whether or not there's value in what's being proposed.
All right, jump in.
My favorite thing about my new job, I was a consultant for a number of years before I joined Microsoft, is that I don't have to have anything with to do with government procurement anymore.
So the interesting about procurement, and it always comes up as a question, the FAR is actually far more agile than it is interpreted and then it is executed. 18F and USDS did a great job of agilizing the FAR when they built their capabilities a few years ago. We were able to take advantage of some of that. We were able to take advantage of some of the hiring, actually, that GSA had put in place with the 18F group. It can get faster, and I just have to defend the federal folks. There are a lot more experts in the federal space than we're aware of. These are very bright, very capable. These are the folks that did it at HUD. I didn't do it; they did it, and all I did was say, "Here's where we're going, guys. and gals, and they got us there. These folks are bright, intelligent, hardworking, dedicated, committed individuals.
Did you want to jump in, Greg, or you're good? All right, he's good. But the point I guess you were making is maybe a little bit around, do they know what they're buying? Are they buying the right things? Or is it just the next shiny object syndrome? Is that part of what your question is?
That's definitely part of it. I mean, there's always the risk of that.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of people in this room who all have shiny objects to the government. When those things are taken piecemeal, you end up with a lack of a real ecosystem, or the potential lack of an ecosystem. That impacts the modernization of all sides.
That's a really good point. Is that, why are we buying something? Let's think through it. What is the mission reason for buying something? And do we have the people to support it? Does it fit in the ecosystem that you talk about? Is it really, what problem are we trying to solve? We're very good, and I'm telling you, HUD was very good, and I've seen it in other places as well, at buying the newest shiny object. We bought, I don't know how many millions of dollars of shelfware that sat there for a couple of years, just because somebody thought that's what we needed, and they really didn't have the business reason for buying it. And what we were able to do at HUD was say, okay, program offices, you do the business. You run your programs, and we will run IT. This Office of the CIO will run IT. We shut down their IT shops. We took away their contracts for purchasing consultants and tools, and we said, if you want something, tell us what your business imperative is. Tell us what your objectives are. What are you trying to get done? And we will build you the solution. Fortunately, I was able, like I said, I was given a few gifts. I was able to make the friends and the relationships within those program offices to build the trust and say, we can do this for you, and we did it.
All right, another question? All right, so let's talk a little bit about Agile. That came up a couple times, and the move that's, as Raphael mentioned, the folks at 18F at GSA and the U.S. Digital Service at the White House, they kind of got the train going, and there's